Welcome to Unity Talks, where the hiring experts of Dallas-based recruiting firm Unity Search engage in lively discussion with successful business leaders to dissect their careers and how they got to where they are today, the obstacles overcome to reach their success, and steps they've taken to stay at the top of their respective fields. So listen in as we provide you with the thought-provoking conversation and ideas that keep industries moving forward.
And welcome back to the next edition of the Unity Talks podcast. I'm your host, David Cathy, where we meet a ton of leaders all throughout DFW. We could also do Austin and Houston because Unity Search has a presence in Austin and Houston, but our core is in DFW. And our focus is always business leaders in the Dallas market, where you get to learn how they got to where they are in their careers and how they stayed where they are. Now, today's guest is going to be a little bit different. While she is a business leader, she is also an executive coach. She's a therapist. She is a podcaster. She does speaking, she writes books, and she probably does about 15 to 20 other things that we don't have time to list out. And I am talking about Dr. Shannan Crawford of Crawford Clinics. Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. We're thrilled that you're going to be joining us today, and hopefully we get to glean some of your knowledge. That's what this is all about.
Absolutely.
Okay, so let's start out with this. I always try to give our guest a little bit of time to tell us, what does Crawford Clinics do? How big is it? Who do you serve? What are your common patients? Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah. So we've been in business for 12 years. She's a preteen, so we're scaling and growing. We do mental health reimagined. So when people are ready to go beyond basic counseling, talk therapy, and they want to get to the unconscious roots and resolve the dynamics, that whole inner world hard drive of your computer, once you're ready for that, we take people to the next level. So peak performance is our objective, to get people into their true self, their optimal performance, and their relationships, individual therapy, family, and couples and children. So we have a whole team, and we can see anybody in the state of Texas.
I love the peak performance.
Yeah.
So I'm designed as an achiever, so I'm always looking for that next thing. So I'm like, ooh, peak performance. My eyes light up, right?
Yes.
And so I'm sure a lot of the people who listen to our podcast also light up when they hear that.
Yeah.
Before we jump too far, so you're going to have to help me understand, and maybe more of these people work at your clinics, so you could define it for us. So I think there's confusion of like, there's a therapist or a counselor or a psychologist, or I mean, there's who does what? How do you decide who to go to?
Yeah, that's a great question. We get that all the time. So a counselor is a degree, usually about 2 to 3 years, and the basis is you're like a plant that's going forward, and we just need to change some things at the conscious level. So like software. So we're not necessarily supposed to go backward, we're supposed to go forward and help you move those things. So a lot of talk, a lot of homework, skills, mindfulness, things that kind of equip you at the software level. And then clinical psychology, which I'm a clinical psychologist, so that's the terminal or highest degree in mental health. So that's our job, is to now go backward into the hard drive or the unconscious mind, that when you know better and you can't do better, you know to not be anxious, you know to not have those thoughts, and yet they keep popping up like whack-a-mole, and you have to keep popping them back down, and your skills aren't working anymore. That's my job. Is there something in the cache or minimize browser window, if you will, that if that gets resolved, now it's finally no longer popping up at inopportune times in your life. So that's what I do. And then psychiatrist is a medical doctor, and that's someone who is really leaning toward the medical model, prescription-based. Some do therapy, and they can do that, but ideally theirs is kind of in the medication space. Psychologist is like the medical doctor to a counselor being a nurse.
Okay. That actually is a really good description, right? That analogy of medical doctor and the nurse.
Yeah.
Totally helps me understand.
Good. I'm glad.
So, perfect. Okay, so you have to tell us, how did you land on this in your career? I mean, we were just talking earlier, you were from California.
Yep.
You spent some time, I think we were talking about, you spent time in Hawaii yesterday.
Yep.
You've landed in your clinic in Keller, Texas, in DFW. So how did you get from California to Keller, Texas, and why this field?
I actually judged psychology. I thought, I'm a high achiever, so you should just do the right thing and it should work out fine, right? Willpower alone should get us there.
That's me.
Sweat equity. I am third generation entrepreneur. We have family businesses for generations. And I hated business as a kid. I judged it because I knew the work ethic. I know that you go home and you still work. And so I didn't want anything to do with business, and I thought, I'm going to be an actress. So I went to LA to be an actress. Unfortunately, I had a very innocent version versus the Harry Weinstein things I've heard about. So no trauma on that front. And I just always had issues myself. You know, like I was cutting, I had self-harm, I had eating disorders, I had depression for no reason. I have a good family, intact. They love me. I've been in prep school my whole life. Like I've had a lot of opportunities. I shouldn't have this many issues. And so I tried basic counseling, and the lady rolled her eyes and said, you know, I don't think you're getting anything out of this. You don't remember your childhood. What's wrong with you? And so I made a judgment in my heart, like psychology is the stupidest profession. I would literally never be a psychologist. Famous last words. So then I went to somebody else, and she said, you know, let's pray and explore if there's a reason that you don't know your memories in childhood and those kinds of things. And so we started doing unconscious work, and she didn't lead me to repressed memories or anything. They came up organically. And I was like, oh my gosh, I have buried trauma that was the root of something that my whole life with whack-a-mole willpower I had been trying to resolve. And if I would just open that minimized browser window and resolve it and do the trauma work, then it went away. And now I'm this person that loves my life. You know, you still have high days, bad days, right? But I actually really love being me. And so it just inspired that I want other people to experience that. So switched my major, went over to clinical psychology, because you can't just get a bachelor's, right? You got to go to a master's, get your doctorate, like be the most ridiculous postdoc in psychoanalysis, whatever, a lot of free time.
I love that. That's such a great story. You know, it's funny. I was just listening to another podcast, and I love health and biohacking podcasts. Love it. That's kind of my passion outside of what I do. And the guy was like, you know, all these people that I talk to about biohacking and health and all this other stuff, like they get into it because they're solving a problem that they usually had in their life somewhere along the way. And that's exactly what you just said, which I love that. That's such great, because you have that firsthand experience and you're on a mission. It's not just, it's a job. It's like a mission that you have.
Absolutely.
So that's great. Okay. And I'm going somewhere in this podcast here in a little bit, because you're going to help. You're going to listen to Dr. Shannan help me a little bit. But before we do, she has this really cool, there are two things that I thought were really cool as I've talked to her. One is restoring self-cohesion, and two is something she calls the inner board meeting.
Yes.
And so I'd love for you to kind of explain what both of those mean, because the inner board meeting really resonated with me, because I've been in business my whole life. I know what board meetings look like.
Yes.
And then the restoring self-cohesion is something that, I mean, you said it's been 20 years of work to come up with this. So tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah. So restoring self-cohesion is like the umbrella, and then a board meeting would be underneath that umbrella. It's like a technique underneath. The whole emphasis is you have many parts of self. So we want harmony. And in health, the right part of me shows up for the right situation. So you're a father and sweet with your kids in this way. You're tender with your wife, and hopefully you're not showing up that way at work. You know, we have a competitive side of you, and hopefully you're not doing that with your kids, but like the right side of you shows up, and it's so seamless, just like a harmony, that we don't even notice the distinction until something is out of tune and it's discordant. That would be like a part of self that's running on a different old programming from the past, and it's interrupting the current signal. So I'm not able to show up the real me. So an example might be PTSD from war, right? People come back and they're like, enjoying time with their family, they hear a loud noise, an intrusive thought, and all of a sudden this anger, monster, scared, panicked response comes out, and it's like, this is not me, but yet this part of me is now leading right now. So that's a classic trauma response. And so my job over the past 20 years is not reinventing the wheel, but streamlining the process. Right now, you'll see there's over 100 different counseling models. So to your question earlier, who do we go to? What do we do? Like, there's a million different outlets out there.
Yep.
So I'm not reinventing it. I'm streamlining. Here's how to put the self back together. You're not broken. There's not something wrong with you, but you have parts of self, or I have parts of self, that are running on old programming, if we go back to computer language. And so I have to actually upgrade that hard drive to be compatible with the mindset work, the mindfulness, the peak performance, all these things we're doing at the conscious level. We need to actually match that at the unconscious level. So there's strategies to do that, and one of them is how to do an internal board meeting. So we create space for the parts of us that we're normally like, just stop, don't think that, don't feel that, make that go away. And we're trying to avoid and distract and stay working instead of just creating space, just like you would with a just gruntled employee. And you'd be like, hey, bud, what's going on? Let's have you meet with HR. Let's figure out the issue. Do we need a conflict between two colleagues? Let's bring that conscious. And so that's psychodynamic. That's the theory that restoring self-cohesion is built on. And now we do it in an internal board meeting. So you resolve the issue and then you get back to being productive internally again.
Okay, so I'm going to pull on that thread just a little bit more. So an internal board meeting, is it me saying to my, like, having this inner dialogue of like, okay, yesterday, man, I probably didn't respond to her appropriately. Well, why didn't you respond to her appropriately? And you're just having this internal, because dialogue of, well, I didn't respond appropriately because of this. Well, yeah, but you felt this way, so she deserved that, right? And you're trying to resolve this conflict as if you're not multiple personalities. It's not like it's just you have multiple sides of you conflicting with each other.
Exactly.
Right?
Absolutely.
And you're just trying to come to a conclusion, a resolution, so that you can move forward.
Right. So there's a slight difference. Most people do a lot of self-reflecting and they ruminate and they think too much. So a lot of people stay up at night and their brain is still reviewing that conversation with their boss or their kids or why did that happen? And
you're talking to them.
And most high achievers are, right? Because that's how we lean into excellence. We figure out the problem, we work the problem, and then we move forward. So the difference is that I'm actually inviting an unconscious part of me. And that's the abstract part that I teach my clients how to do in executive coaching, of actually leaning in like, hey, me that is feeling vulnerable, me that is feeling offended, me that is feeling overwhelmed right now. Normally our ego, which is the center part of us that kind of decides what I allow to see in myself versus what I project onto others or I disavow and don't allow to be conscious. If my ego will stand down, I don't mean ego pride, I mean like the kind of mediator in between. If that will stand down and I go, man, if I have a ruminating over this fear of rejection, well, then probably there is a me that is feeling rejected. So then I have just B as an acronym of breathe and explore. So I'll repeat it, breathe and explore. So you breathe in because you're lowering the sympathetic nervous system, the amygdala is your fire alarm. And when you breathe, you're down-regulating that stress response of overthinking and analyzing in the conscious mind, and actually leaning into kindness, curiosity to explore, hey, me that is feeling like that, even though I, as a high achiever, successful business owner, I don't feel that, but there could be a part of me unconsciously that does feel that. Bring it conscious, and then resolve whatever needed to be resolved way back there that didn't get it, because we whack-a-moled.
Yeah.
But now finally we can X out of that browser window.
Yeah. I think so many, I'm going to offer myself up as an example for the rest of this show, because I feel like so many people who are in my shoes in the business world, leading companies, they stuff things, right? They're not going to let it come up. They're just going to stuff it.
Control.
And then they have this, which is me. Yeah. It's this, okay, maybe I have a little bit of this fear of failure, or this imposter syndrome. And part of that has propelled you to get where you are.
Absolutely.
You know, without that, maybe you wouldn't be as successful as you are, but it's not all good.
Yeah.
And so here's my example, and Dr. Shannan's going to help me through this, okay? And I think that many executives are like, I'm going to say pride from the ego pride part, do not want to align themselves with maybe someone in your shoes at your clinic, because it's like, oh, I don't need someone like that. I can willpower and work my way through this, and I'm going to be fine. Yeah. And I think there's a hesitancy. So I'm going to try to break down that barrier a little bit here. Yeah. So here's my example. Tuesday, I had to give a discussion. It was just a 1-hour discussion to a group of about 100 CPAs sitting in a room. They have continuing professional education. And so we were talking about something that I know very well. It's recruiting and retention post-COVID 4 years later, and what you need to do to help run your business to recruit the right talent and retain your best employees. Yeah. I know it great, but here I am sitting in this room in front of 100 people, and I'm like, who am I to be giving this conversation? Like, what am I even doing here? Am I even qualified to do this? Like, maybe I shouldn't be giving this conversation. And then I have to like talk myself up, right? I've got this inner dialogue going like, okay, David, look at what your past is. Like, you've been successful enough to be here. But I still have this imposter that comes up inside of me and just tries to beat me down. You're not leading your team good enough. You're not a very good leader. Why do I keep doing this? Like, this is an issue.
Right. Yeah.
How do I move forward to the next step? Am I just always going to face this issue? Are people always going to face this?
If you stay at a conscious level, yes, that will absolutely stay. But with an internal board meeting, you can acknowledge, or anybody, not just you, but all of us, right? We overwork ourselves, stress and burnout. We go into perfectionism. We don't delegate. We don't trust others. We have a fear of failure. All these strategies that we use to try to make sure we never confront our fear of inadequacy. And fear and bravery are in opposition to each other. You have two responses on the inside. Your central nervous system has the stress response, which is your sympathetic nervous system. That causes your mind to go blank. It causes you to overthink and overanalyze everything. It causes your body to kind of sweat and get uncomfortable, and you're not like sharp and clear because it's hijacking. The back of your brain is taking all the energy. So back to the high achievers that think they don't need what I'm saying, my clients have significantly more effective results because you're putting the energy back at the front of the brain. Prefrontal is where you're sharp, you're clear, you analyze, you're strategic, you can talk yourself through a situation without it continuing to nag you. So why that's important? Because you're parasympathetic, which is the one that turns off, and that's the chill state that you feel comfortable in your own skin, you love leading your team, your family, your organization, and that's the state I get my clients in when they're willing to do an internal board meeting. So hypothetically, because truthfully, this is all of us, it's not just you. You're just being brave to give an example that we all have.
Good.
That we all have this fear of inadequacy, this fear that I'm actually not enough. And so human nature is to try to talk myself into, look what you've accomplished, look at your degrees, look at your success, and the reviews people say about you, how great you are. But in reality, I am just whack-a-moling every time I do that. Instead of saying, hey, I acknowledge there's a part of me that believes, probably since whatever age in childhood and school or whatever, that I'm not enough. Okay, that part of me come forward. And then you just spend a little bit of time being present. Think of it like a, annoyed employee that once you give them voice and you can resolve that, then the energy of that trapped emotion leaves. So that means when the energy leaves, you don't have it spiking the amygdala anymore, which is the back of the brain. Once that quiets, your brain can stay in the prefrontal and you're in that sweet spot, that flow or that zone where you feel like yourself, you execute, and you're not having to fight a bunch of chatter. So that's what I would do. I would say, okay, we have a protector that's fearing what people are going to say today, fearing not doing it right, who am I, etc. But underneath that, I just acknowledge there is a me that feels like I'm inadequate, and that's okay. I make peace with that. I acknowledge, I breathe into that, and then I explore where did that come from, and then you gain resolution. What our goal is that the part of you that believes I am inadequate and the part of you that's afraid of acknowledging that to yourself, not to others, it's actually to ourselves. Once that gets resolved, then it's like you're Xing out of that browser window once and for all.
How long does that I mean, that seems like it takes practice. Like it's not something that you just, here's what you do. You go do this and, you take a cold plunge and you're all good. It feels like that takes like a lot of practice, even to get your mental state there, right? Because I feel like would there be resistance
1,000%. 1,000%. And that's what I was saying. Our ego, yes, there's the pride side of ego, but there's also the ego that I've constructed of how I want to see myself. And so if I try to see something in me that's like, whoa, I can't be like my stepfather. I can't be like, my mom or that kid at school that was the bully. I can't acknowledge badness in me or inadequacy in me, vulnerability in me, whatever that taboo is. Of course, I'm going to have unconscious resistance, and that translates to business. The moment that you need to talk to somebody and you feel unconsciously out of control or critiqued, our own shame response will shut them down, put them in their place, and then we're going to regain control of the situation. Now, that feels peaceful and fine, and I don't see a problem with it until you get your 360s, and then the employee or the family member is giving you feedback that I don't feel as close to you because you keep shutting something down in me. So back to your point. Yes, sometimes it takes a long time, and sometimes once you learn it, you can do it in real time. I would say the difference is sometimes it's rooted in a deeper trauma. that I may not be aware of. And I don't use trauma like big case, you got a
Right,
car accident.
right.
It could be anything, of being humiliated by a teacher as a kid,
Yep.
or not knowing how to read and then the class laughs at you. It could be anything that in my little heart I went, oh no, I'm inadequate. I don't have what it takes. I'm not as good as the other kids. Whatever it might have been, if it's more deeply rooted, then it does take more rehearsal. Just like renewing your mind at a conscious level, the more you rehearse something, you're creating neural pathways.
Yeah.
Same with unconscious. The more you rehearse that, the more it becomes true and it feels true and it settles inside. So I do it in real time because I obviously do this all the time for
Yeah.
others and myself.
Yeah.
But I can just be, about to present to thousands of people and I'll just internally, hey, you're okay. I love you. I'm proud of you. Any part of me that's feeling scared and unconscious, I bring you conscious.
Yeah.
And I'll just imagine a hug. Sounds woo-woo. And when I tell business people, they always think that sounds woo-woo.
Yeah.
But actually, physiologically, you're releasing GABA. GABA is the neurochemical that tells the body to turn off the stress response. Cool thing about our imagination, whether it's imagined or it's real, if I believe it's happening, your body has the neurological response.
Wow. Okay. So I'm kind of blown away here because I've never heard of GABA.
GABA.
GABA. So all you hear is your cortisol level,
Yes.
right? Your stress response.
GABA turns off cortisol.
Exactly. So I'm like, I know the cortisol. Like I
Yes.
get that a lot.
We know cortisol as business owners.
Yes. I don't know this GABA, but is it a drug that you can? I mean, I want it intravenously.
Is it on the streets?
Yes,
Just
I
kidding.
want that. God, that's so okay. So you made the reference a couple times to when you're able to do this, you're able to X out and close that browser window.
Yeah.
But that browser window, when you're new to it, doesn't stay closed for long. It
Right.
keeps opening back up.
Yep.
And you have tools that help you close that browser window, and
Yeah.
it become. I would assume over time,
Yeah.
it stops popping up as frequently. It takes longer or something more dramatic, maybe, to open back up over time. Is that accurate?
Yeah, I would say so. So there's times, I think of your inner world like there's scaffolding, right? And
Okay.
so we can only steward so much transformation and upgrade at a time. That's why people
Okay.
are usually like, they'll go to therapy or counseling or coaching and they're like, hey, I got what I wanted. Great. And your inner world's letting you know we're at a good place right now. That doesn't mean we're done. That confuses most people because then they're like, hey, why'd that come back? It's not that it comes back. It's that was the amount I could steward. Because like if you were changing a building, my family's in construction, you don't just whack-a-mole the whole building, right? Like you have to do it incrementally if you want the building to still stand, right?
Yeah.
And so you have to do it strategically. And so your inner world can do a little bit and then a time of rest and then upgrade and then a time of rest. So that's why Crawford Clinics, we're positioned to help people when they've already done basic counseling and they're like, okay, I've done talk therapy, I know what my issues are. And yet it doesn't resolve it, like it still keeps coming back. That's our niche. That's where we help people close out once and for all those browser windows.
Okay, so I was just going to go there. So it sounds like, and I was going to ask you this, you probably have seen people come to your clinic and they're like, great, thank you, Dr. Shannan.
Yep.
You cured me. We'll see you later. Don't need to see you anymore. And then all of a sudden they're back 6 months
I
later.
prepared them that they will be.
Okay, that's what I was going to ask. I would bet that you'd be willing to say, hey, look,
Yeah.
here's what's going to happen. You're going to feel great. You're going to feel all these things. You're going to feel like you don't need to come here anymore.
And you don't for a while.
And they're probably thinking, oh, she just wants me to come back because she just wants to keep me as a patient. When in reality, it just comes back 6 months, 1 year, whatever it is.
Yeah,
Right?
but you're doing layer upon layer. Like it's a house.
Yeah.
So to get to those deeper layers, all the foundational work, and that's where we really honor the counseling people have already done by the time they've gotten to Crawford Clinics. All of that foundational work of mindset and skills and coping and mindfulness, all of those things are brilliant and needed. We're not minimizing the importance of software, right? But if you don't ever restore the foundation of your house, you're constantly painting cracks that keep not getting resolved. So we steward that by doing a little at a time and preparing people that your inner world can handle so much, but then also be okay with the fact that when the symptoms come back, then that's your inner world letting you know, hey, it's time to revisit some of those things.
Okay, so can I put you on the spot then
Please,
real quick?
absolutely.
Okay, so you have Crawford Clinics.
Yes.
So you run that, you do speaking, you do podcasts, you have your own podcast, and the name of your podcast is?
Unlock You
Unlock
with
You.
Dr. Shannan Crawford.
So you have so many of these things. So it's like you've got this one main business, but you've got these other businesses.
Right.
And you're an entrepreneur, small business owner.
Yeah.
I feel personally, my two are probably imposter syndrome, which I've spoken on here about before, and fear of failure. Like those are my two things. This is your profession. You feel those things?
Not as much as I used to, but 1,000% at the beginning. Absolutely. Especially as a female, where I'm usually the only female in a room of men. That's very common at the beginning.
Okay.
It doesn't happen as much anymore, but if it does, I'll work on it.
Yeah.
But I've been in that space 20 years, so I've been working on it a while.
I know, but it's comforting to know that someone who has studied it,
Yes.
also has felt it and does on occasion. And it's not like, it ever goes away, but it doesn't come as frequently. And you can go through times and periods easier and stuff like that, instead of like just pummeling yourself like, you got to do better. And
Right.
So let's talk about Crawford Clinic. You have one location now, or?
Yes, with multiple coming.
That's what I was going to ask. What is next for Crawford Clinics? Because I'm sitting here thinking, do you have counselors there as well as licensed psychologists, as well as, and you plan to replicate that model, different cities to help people? Because this is super helpful. Like, we need more people in the business world to go down this path.
Absolutely. And we have Crawford Care. So we partner strategically with organizations to provide the therapy for their employees and executive coaching for their team, so that a lot of, and I have to be careful in my wording, but a lot of psychology sometimes can lean toward emotions, and that's not always beneficial for a business structure. So our therapists are trained to be very pro-business, not at the cost of the therapy of the client, right? But there is there's a way to kind of indulge people's feelings and create entitlement and all kinds of weird stuff if you're not careful. So not all counseling and counselors are the same. Our therapists are trained so that the person prospers and the business prospers. So we are doing more virtual, so less brick and mortar, and more either concierge coming to the organization or doing virtual, so that we're more accessible to more businesses.
Yeah, I like that. And you're not just businesses either. I mean, you're group therapy, family therapy, you do all the... We're spending time talking about the business side because we're talking to a business audience and we're two entrepreneurs, right? But you do more than just that in helping people. Absolutely. And nonprofits are a passion, and I have a nonprofit. Well, I was going to ask, tell us a little bit about, in case someone who's watching wants to know, like you do speaking as well. Yeah. You have a blog. So tell us about where you go speaking and what are your blogs about, so that they can tune in a little bit more to unlock you and some of your other avenues. Yeah. So we have e-courses, we have webinars to teach people and make this as accessible as possible. I wish as a kid they would have classes of like, hey, this is your inner world. You're not just a bicycle where you just need to like work harder, try harder. Because I think high achievers take that gauntlet and like, if I just, then I'll, and that's not reality. We don't do that with our cardiovascular health. We don't do that with our neurological health. But somehow we treat ourselves as if I just pedal harder on this bicycle, instead of realizing you're a Maserati. Like, you're brilliant, sophisticated, complex, and multifaceted. When you work with your system, you have an actual intelligent design. If you learn that system and you partner with it, it will flourish and it will shine for you. If you work against yourself and just whack-a-mole and mean towards yourself and try to avoid, distract, and workaholism, which are common strategies in business in particular, then we're actually setting ourselves up for a house divided against itself cannot stand. So you have more distractibility, more anxiety, more depression, and relationship issues, because it's hard to be fully present with someone else if we're not being fully present with ourselves. Yeah. So we have the podcast, we have e-courses, webinars, crawfordclinics.com. And then as a speaker, drshannancrawford.com, spelled differently, Shannan, S-H-A-N-N-A-N. And I love speaking, and I get to do that for organizations and businesses all the time. Something you just said resonated so much. The goal, when you're an achiever, the goalpost keeps moving. Yes. Because I do this to myself all the time. I'm like, once I do this, then I'll feel like I'm there. And then I do it and I'm like, yeah, but then there's this. Yeah. And so I need to go there. And it just keeps moving down the road. And I keep telling myself part of that has been beneficial because it really has. It gets me to where I'm at. But part of it, it's like, man, there's something wrong with this. And I know there are so many other people out there that face the same thing because I talk to them all the time because you congregate and you talk about your struggles.
Yeah.
In fact, I'm in this book club, which our guest over here is in the book club as well with me. And we talk about this all the time, how like there's that other level and when is enough enough? And that's such a striver's mentality. And so I'm so thankful that we have people like you who are out there to help people like me.
All of us.
All of us.
Yes.
All of us, these issues. So,
Can I share one last thing that I think is really fun? So a secondary benefit I wasn't expecting. Like if you think of all your characters on the inside of you, and if you've seen Inside Out 2, that would be a brilliant movie for anybody who's watching this. We're more sophisticated than the cartoon, but it is helpful to see the different parts of self that are fighting on the inside. When we are in a state of disharmony internally, you have parts of self dedicated to fear, to self-protection, to make sure I don't get exposed as a inferior or self-sabotage, right? So I have all these strategies, but those are actually, it's manpower working against you instead of peak performance. So it's been really fun to work with people. And the secondary benefit is they become more brave and adventurous. A lot of my clients start doing Ironman, or they take their wives to dance classes and they reinvigorate their marriage, like start leaning into relationship with their team, with their kids. So I've seen people access different sides of their personality and become more creative and fun and bold and confident, where that wasn't necessarily our original goal. But when you reassign your employees metaphorically and they're back into facing the future versus protecting the past, you really get to see people shine and come into their own in a fun way.
That sounds so cool. That's awesome. I have one last question for you. So our audience, right? We've got climbers who are working their way up the corporate ladder. We've got other leaders who are running companies. They're entrepreneurs. They're running businesses. What is a great practical tool that they could start doing tomorrow? Just, we can't do 50 things, but we can do one.
Sure.
What is your recommendation?
Yeah. Okay. I would say get a piece of paper, draw a line horizontally in the middle of the paper. Draw circles representing all the parts of you that you represent. So let's say there's the spouse side of you, there's the adventure side of you, parent side of you, business part of you, learner part, whatever you love, and you identify consciously as who you are. Put all of those with names on the circles at the top. And then there's a Shakespeare quote that I love. She protesteth too much. Okay. And so everything I deny and reject, usually I find annoying in other people. I try to shut down in myself or others. And so then now become curious. What do I not allow? Like for me as a child, I was never angry. I am the nicest, sweetest person you've ever met. But I had self-harm, I had eating disorders, I had depression, all of which, if you unpack, usually have some form of turning against the self. It's actually anger, if I don't express out, will come against.
Internal, yeah.
Right? So I never had anger. So the absence of something in your personality is also important. If people never, like there's some people with sexual arousal that just never comes in, or it's always that direction, or they can't learn, they can't focus, they're always distracted, or they have this temper that they're like, I'm going to shut that down, that's not going to happen anymore. Whatever you have kind of conflict with, whether it's in yourself that you're aware of or at someone else, that you now make little squares like jail. And so there's parts of you that are in jail. Those are quote unquote bad parts. We've called those disavowed. You're like, if it was an agent, I have disavowed you. I've fired you out of my conscious committee. You don't get to be a part of me. The problem is it means it's not consciously mediated. So that's what pops out of us, and we're not consciously choosing that. So when people are like, oh, dang it, how did I just yell at that employee like that? How did I just cuss at my kid? Like, that's not me. How am I turning into this person that I never wanted to be? Because it's not consciously mediated. Everything we disavow and reject, there's not an actual like far away place we can send it. It just is unconscious. So then when enough pressure, time, transition happens in life, now that's popping out of us, and it's really annoying and frustrating. So my request would be just be kind. So breathe and explore. Be aware of those times. And then now be curious of me that gets angry, me that yells at such and such team member or child or spouse. I love you. It's okay to be angry. I'm not saying okay to abuse people. I'm saying it's okay for you to exist. And then what originally caused you to be angry, that is a stage of grief. Anger is a stage of grief. Then what do I need to finish grieving or working through to gain resolution? So then that part of me can now be reassigned, and anger can actually be an asset, especially in business, because it helps us have better boundaries. A lot of high achievers don't delegate, they don't have good boundaries, they just work themselves to death because they don't know how to kind of navigate. I'm angry. Anger in health is boundaries. It's speaking up and saying early on, hey, I'm actually not okay with that. I really appreciate and value you, but let's look at this situation at home or at team. And so now when we bring that conscious, you've now reconnected and established relationship with yourself and others by allowing that part of you to be conscious versus, no, it's fine. It's okay. I'll take it. Don't worry. I'll take the trash out. Don't worry. I'll pick that up too. Deadline. No, I got it. It's fine. Every time you do that, you're actually suppressing anger, and you're more likely to have a temper later and then mad at your temper going, oh, anger, you're bad, and you're in a vicious cycle. So I would bring those things conscious and befriend them.
Yeah. Wow, such great advice, Dr. Shannan. Thank you so much. Okay, so crawfordclinics.com.
Yep.
And then your website is?
DrShannanCrawford.com.
And that's SHANNAN.
Yeah.
ShannanCrawford.com. Thank you so much for joining us today.
You're welcome. It's been a privilege. Privilege.
I appreciate it so much. And for everybody that's listening, please go to the website. Please sign up for their blog or check into the podcast, because I know this has been really helpful. I know yesterday after I got done talking to her, I went home, I listened to a podcast today. I'm like, man, this is going to be another one. I have way too many, but this is going to be another one that I'm going to start putting on rotation. And for all of those out there that joined us, thank you so much. And until next time.
If you're looking for the next step in your career or the missing piece for your team, Unity Search has you covered. Whether it's finance and accounting, tax services, information technology, or human resources, Unity Search is here for you with experienced and dedicated hiring professionals. Reach out today and take the next step. Unity Search, placing you first.